IVM.
$100. That's all it takes to begin your journey with Bitcoin and Ethereum. No, really. With CoinSwitch, you can start investing in over 100 cryptocurrencies with just 100 rupees. On top of that, there are zero charges for deposits and withdrawals, so you can trade, buy, sell, however and whenever you want. All of this, plus their extremely intuitive interface, makes CoinSwitch the perfect app for beginners in the crypto space. But don't take my word for it. Just download CoinSwitch for free and try it out for yourself. If you'd like more information on cryptocurrencies, tune into A Show About Crypto with me, Rohan Joshi, my new adventure on IVM Podcasts. CoinSwitch, kuch to badlega.
Hello and welcome to the Wire Talks. I'm Siddharth Bhatia. Aadhaar has taken over our lives. It was to be just a tool to make cash for welfare schemes easier. But now it is impossible to get any service without producing an Aadhaar card, from a telephone connection to a bank account to even a hospital bed. The Election Commission now has revived an old proposal to link Aadhaar with the voter's ID. It was shot down in 2015, but we don't know what the motivation is, and activists are already pointing out the dangers. Srinivas Kodali, a volunteer with the Citizens Collective Rethink Aadhaar, has documented the Aadhaar project and the issues around it for many, many years, such as privacy, exclusion, and human rights violations. He has challenged the Election Commission in court, arguing that Aadhaar was used to delete no less than 55 lakh people from the voters' rolls. Kodali joins us today to explain why this proposal is not necessarily such a good idea, though of course I leave it to him. He'll have a lot of points to make, and how, more importantly, Aadhaar has become such a massive and I would say monstrous presence in our lives. Srinivas Kodali, welcome to the Wire Talks.
Thank you for having me, Siddharth.
Srinivas, what was Aadhaar supposed to do when it was first announced and introduced in 2009-10?
I mean, there were a lot of narratives, but the primary narrative was that it was going to solve fraud and it was going to help transfer, direct benefit transfer money to people directly. And again, it was also linked to the whole National Population Register exercise because it happened right after the Bombay attacks. So there were multiple interests at stake, but the primary interest was always about direct benefit transfer and about how it should be easier for people to access welfare. Like welfare was the motive, right? It was limited, at least the Supreme Court tried to limit it to welfare now because that was the early argument which was made.
But why has it grown now to such an extent that we can't manage our lives without it? Was that part of what was announced or intended? Because, I go anywhere and they said, show me your Aadhaar, including in hospitals and banks and telephone and so much more. Why has it become so big?
See, Aadhaar was supposed to be a gateway, right? Like it was supposed to, for Indians, for rural Indians who were going to access India's digitized systems, mostly government systems for accessing welfare or accessing anything and everything, even the private sector, right? So for accessing services, they needed a login ID, right? Like when you go to YouTube or the Facebook set of services or Google services, you use a login ID to access a host of services. So the initial idea that Mr. Nilekani had probably involved all of this, but they never disclosed any of this. Like after the project get announced, you suddenly hear them saying, no, private sector will also get access to these APIs. It's no more about welfare only. It won't be limited to welfare only, right? So which is when you start hearing APIs are going to come. You start reading reports that said Aadhaar is going to be linked to healthcare data. Aadhaar is going to be used everywhere and anywhere. And this was because it was meant to be the ID that you can use to access every service in a digital India, right? Like if India is being digitized and to access any service, whether government or private, you can use Aadhaar to do that. And
No, 1 second. Are you saying can do or must do?
well, they wanted that. They never said it. And there's a lot of coercion that has become primarily after the Aadhaar Act in 2016, right? So the must kind of came much later, but the idea was always there since the inception. Because if you read the early reports, their plans, it always said this, that we want a lot of people to use all of this. And they were practically forcing it even from the early days.
So there was a lack of transparency. But I remember pre-2009, in fact, people like Usha Ramanathan and a few others were already warning that this thing will be very, very dangerous and we should completely not allow it to happen. So it's not as though people hadn't realized that there was a potential problem in this, especially those who speak about privacy, etc.
I mean, the signs were already there, right? Like you're witnessing an identity project coming right after Bombay attacks, which where there was also, like there were multiple identity projects. It's not Aadhaar anymore. There was the MHA trying to push NPR. And there were also these biometric ID cards which were being given to the fishermen in Bombay. There were Nepali fishermen in Bombay waters who didn't have any IDs. And then you had the Indian Home Ministry trying to give biometric ID cards to fishermen. So the concerns were largely around every other ID card. But in case of Aadhaar, it was more about the private sector's role, right? Like even when you look at the MHA's role, okay, we knew where it was coming from an internal security point of view. But the private interests were never clear. What Mr. Nilekani was saying of fixing welfare, fixing fraud was always a cover, right? Like, so the warning signs always existed. And what people like Dr. Usha Ramanathan has said, and others, many others who were also part of the Rethink Aadhaar collective, who have been warning about the dangers of this system, existed from day one of the project, because the way it was being forced, the way it was being pushed through, right? So everything from privacy, citizenship, all of these questions were coming up and nobody had any answers. They were like, we're just doing this, and there was a lack of transparency, as you say it, because until there was an early RTI filed asking the UIDA to start disclosing what is it that they are doing, almost everything about the project was secret.
Which now the originator or the creator of the Aadhaar program has moved back into the background and governments have taken over. What is it about Aadhaar that governments as varied as Manmohan Singh's UPA and NDA headed by Narendra Modi, what is it about it that makes it so attractive to them?
I think it's the money, right? The idea that data is the new oil has something that captured everybody's attention, including India's largest billionaire, right? So when everybody's trying to implement this project or force it down on citizens, they're both political and economic reasons. But when you look at the economic reasons, it's all about the money. And the private interest in the project was all about that. And we know the political interests varied depending upon whether it was the Congress government or the current BJP government. There were different set of political interests. Even the state establishments like the MHA had their own interests, which existed as back in the Congress government and which also exist with the BJP government, of verifying whether someone's a citizen or not. And this kind of goes back to Bombay attacks. And if you go back, it goes back all the way back to Kargil when the first idea of NPR actually came, right? So it's about money when you look at the economic interests, that's very clear. But this was never explained to us, to a normal individual. It was always told that it's only about welfare. But where does the money part come in? I think Mr. Nilekani made it very clear somewhere midway. He said that Indians will become data rich first. when Aadhaar will be used to collect Indians' data, and Indians can exchange their data to get loans, right? And which is happening right now. So it was always about using individuals' data, their patterns, to understand whether someone will pay back loans and to do a bit of financial inclusion. So there was also a push from agencies like NABARD. In fact, some of the early experiments on biometrics and financial inclusion in this country happened through the NABARD Technology Fund. So even beyond Aadhaar, before Aadhaar ever came up as a project, the idea of using technology for giving out loans, using technology to give out ID cards for welfare have always existed in India. You just saw it morphing into a giant project.
Giant project, as I said, is an understatement. It's almost a beast looming large over our lives. But tell me, I'm a citizen, along with 1.3 billion others. What is the citizen supposed to do in the circumstances? You can't exist.
Well, that was the idea always, right? What you're witnessing here is a nation state using its power to force citizens to give away some of their sovereignty in the digital realm, right? By sharing their identity details, sharing their data, so that the nation state can share 1.3 billion individuals' data to the private sector, so that there could be a lot of investments into India to grow a digital economy, to make a data economy. And these plans have always existed. It's not like suddenly that we realized this. It was always this case. If one goes back and looks at the National E-Governance Plan, which is where you would see some of the origins of the UID, where they explain the other allied projects like the NPR, like the CCTNS system. And mind you, if you go back to the time of 2009-10, because that's when the National E-Governance Plan comes out, it also recommends building an architecture for India, right? It was never about Aadhaar. Aadhaar was like a gateway for services. And there was this early bill called the E-Services Delivery Bill, which was introduced in the parliament actually, before the Aadhaar bill. So Aadhaar was kind of a gateway for you to access e-services. And there were a host of these e-governance projects, and all of them combined was going to build a digital India. So now, if you ask me what is a citizen supposed to be doing in this, the governments have always said that, okay, we are building this for you, right? Like e-governance is for you. It's going to simplify governance. It's going to make it easier for you. But what people didn't anticipate is the coercion. If the government stated all of this clearly, if it was transparent to the parliament, this is what they were trying to build, we could have added a lot of protections at its early stages. But because if they said all of this, it wouldn't have been possible for them to push this project. So they always lied about the project. They somehow wanted this to be pushed. They didn't want the population to understand what's happening, because if they do, they will resist, which eventually did happen because a lot of people went to court about it. So if you're asking me, what should you do? I would say fight for your rights, approach courts and talk to your parliament members, participate in the democratic structure.
No, when I say what is a citizen to do, you've given a very nice perspective on it. But suppose I go to a hospital or get a new telephone SIM card, and they say proof of address. Actually, they don't say that. They say it straight up front, Aadhaar. And suppose I say I'm not going to give it. What happens?
Everybody knows what happens. When somebody says you have to give Aadhaar, you have to give it. Otherwise, they stop giving you service, right? Like, take my own bank. If I have to go open an account, they're asking for Aadhaar. but it's been very clear. It's been made very clear by the Supreme Court in its 2018 judgment on Aadhaar that the government of India will not link Aadhaar with bank accounts. Okay, the only place where they allowed it was Aadhaar and PAN linking for tax filing. That's it, right? So, and the Supreme Court has made it very clear that Aadhaar and bank linking cannot be allowed. Aadhaar and mobile linking cannot be allowed. Yet, after the judgment, it keeps happening. In fact, the Finance Minister, Nirmala Sitharaman, actually made several statements in press conferences saying that she has instructed PSUs, banks, to start linking Aadhaar with bank accounts, which is directly against the Supreme Court orders. Now, in any democracy, for people to get some of their rights exercised, to get some of these court orders exercised, you have to demand it, right? There will be laws, but until you demand someone to actually follow the rule of law, nobody will. So if my bank is going to deny me a bank account because I didn't give an Aadhaar, then the next procedure is you file a complaint, you go to the RBI, then you go to the courts. But it's very taxing. It's hard for normal public to do it. You don't. The legal fees are high. It's going to take you months or years to navigate through whole of the system, even within the RBI or even at the judiciary. So people just give it away because they don't have a choice. But unless there is a large section of the public challenging these systems, where they ask you to implement the rule of law, the Supreme Court's order in this case, things are not going to change. I mean, you have a choice to demand better, and you have to exercise that.
So you and other researchers have come up with a host of problems around Aadhaar. For example, we know people have found it very difficult to register, to non-recognition of fingerprints and irises, to not having a proof of address, which is more common than one thinks. To show proof of address, you need a proof of address. What is somebody who keeps shifting rented accommodation to do, for example, or suppose somebody is living with her parents and she has all the details, but the parents, because they are retired and old, don't have it. What are they supposed to do?
Okay, I want to illustrate with an example. There was a friend of mine. She actually lived in Bombay until the lockdown. But once the lockdown hit, just before the lockdown, I think she came back to Hyderabad. So all of her address proofs are with Bombay address.
But what is the Bombay address if she's renting?
She was renting a place. And
so what is the proof of address?
I think she had an Aadhaar. Her address in her Aadhaar was in Bombay, and she came back to Hyderabad. And she could not access anything in Hyderabad because pretty much every other ID card had the Bombay address, right? Like for her to get anything changed, even within Aadhaar, as you said, she needed yet another proof of address with the Hyderabad address, and she didn't have any. It's pretty much hard to navigate through the system. Aadhaar was supposed to solve this, actually. At least that's what they said, right? Like you don't need any proofs to get an Aadhaar. But then again, when you go back and look at the Aadhaar card, if you look at it behind, it says Aadhaar is not a proof of address. Aadhaar is not a proof of age. Aadhaar is not a proof of so many different things. All Aadhaar does is it confirms your identity. That's it. It's not a proof of citizenship. It's not a proof of your gender or age. It's just like a self-declared ID. It so happened that you have submitted these details to the UIDAI, and we are verifying that you have submitted these details. That's it. Because there was no formal verification with Aadhaar. And because there were so many interests from the MHA to actually verify people on the ground, and all these economic and political interests playing around, both by private sector firms wanting Aadhaar to simplify KYC so that they can issue more SIM cards, they can issue more bank accounts, And then there is the security establishment saying, no, we have to verify this. It has made the project very complex. Okay, you never really cleared up what this was going to do. You never said it was going to be a proof of address, but then later you say this is a proof of address and there's no verification, right? So the private sector wanted some relief in all of these KYC requirements, but the national security establishment didn't want to relax it. And it's these forces fighting between each other actually made it much complex for citizens. Now, ideally, any other self-declared verification procedure should work, but in India, I believe it pretty much doesn't exist anymore with all of these complexities.
You know that, I belong to a generation, and even you might remember, you could get a bank account without any kind of proof as such. And I can fully understand that you have to show your PAN card number, because suppose you are getting loads of cash and the sourcing has to be established. But we managed for decades with just saying that this is our address. So you have clearly explained that this is a convergence of private and public interests. But when you say that you're part of Rethink Aadhaar, isn't that a bit too late now?
I don't think so. Okay, so we understand this, that Aadhaar was just the start. What they're trying to build is a larger ecosystem where they want to link every other database, every other private government database, to build a giant, what they call India Enterprise Architecture. It's actually a project that the government of India is building now. And where are they inspired about this? A lot of these projects, the inspiration for these projects were taken directly from Estonia. It's one of those tiny countries, tiny Eastern European countries, which after breaking up of the Soviet Union, joined the European Union. And it was one of those Eastern European countries which was kind of a World Bank laboratory, okay, where a lot of these experimentations were carried out, where they pretty much digitized their entire country with a digital ID, except it was a smart card. And they built something called Estonian X-Road project, where several databases, your tax database, your electoral database, your vehicle registry database, your courts, everything is digitized and all of them are interconnected. Your government pretty much runs on tech. And that's what they're trying to do in India. Except in Estonia, they clearly said what they were doing and they put in a set of ground rules. They said citizens have these set of rights. That's not happening in India. Okay. And even in case of the digital ID project in Estonia, it was a smart card. There were a lot of options for people. In India, they pushed biometrics, which never really worked. Even now, I think there is time to change, time to move away to a certain extent to enable a host of people, leprosy patients, as you say, who can't access the system, right? Like you can stop forcing Aadhaar everywhere. And which is what the Supreme Court did with its order. All you need to do is implement the Supreme Court order on Aadhaar, even the majority judgment, which actually allows you to exit the Aadhaar system if you got the Aadhaar card before the Aadhaar Act in 2016. I got my Aadhaar card in 2013 when there was no law. And the Supreme Court judgment says I should be allowed to exit the system, right? So this is a digital governance that Government of India is trying to adopt. And this entire architecture, this entire digital architecture does not follow the constitution at any layer. It centralizes systems. States don't have any power. If you look at the upcoming National Health ID, that's coming because Supreme Court had said no private access for Aadhaar, which is why they are not linking Aadhaar with health data and are saying, oh, we'll get a health ID for health. We'll get a farmer ID for farmers. It's all part of India's digitization story. And there is time to rethink even now.
You found in your researches, and others have too, that there were a lot of examples of data leakage. Now, what exactly did you find? I mean, the one is at the theoretical level, but one is at the practical level. What exactly did you see?
Okay, so the idea with Aadhaar was data collection and to share some of this data for KYC reasons between private sector and government, right? Like this was facilitated by the government, by the UIDAI and several other departments by building APIs, open APIs. And what it essentially did is it created a free flow of data between a host of organizations. And there were because there was no law to do anything with that data. And even if there was a data breach, where this data was accidentally shared, accidentally published, or even if someone with malicious intent got into government servers and started selling this data somewhere else, or even if the private sector which had access to this data sold it to someone else, there was pretty much no recourse, right? And all of these instances have taken place. It was like a wild, wild west. What you're witnessing is the early stages of digitization, where all of the problems with digitizations, no access, like exclusion, privacy invasions, and when we meant privacy invasions, they were different for different set of people, right? Like, and it's different for you and me versus a woman versus a LGBTQ person versus a young child or a old woman, right? Like everybody experiences it differently. And the nature of harms, because this data was being shared between a host of actors, was different. Financial fraud is one of them, right? Like you are actively witnessing a lot of social engineering attacks where you're convinced to share your Aadhaar numbers, your OTPs. And that's happening because a lot of this data is accessible to fraudsters. And that was the early warning that we were trying to give, that look, because you're sharing a lot of this information without actually informing the public what could be the harms around it. Now, there is this system called the Aadhaar-enabled payment system, through which you can use your Aadhaar and fingerprints to withdraw money. Aadhaar and OTP to do that. A lot of people don't know this, but it's available for every bank account. It's not just limited to the poor who are dependent on DBT. The Supreme Court tried to shut this down. Like when the Supreme Court said no linking of Aadhaar and bank accounts, it pretty much was shutting down Aadhaar-based banking. But you had the UIDAI and the Attorney General doing some creative reading of the Supreme Court judgment, saying that no, people can use Aadhaar for voluntary reasons, or they could use it for DBT. So technically, they can use Aadhaar to also withdraw this money for DBT. And if someone calls you up, if some fraudster calls you up, gets access to your Aadhaar details and your OTP, he could easily withdraw money from your bank accounts, because this feature that they built is also a vector of attack, right? And a lot of people lost their money through these APIs, through these very APIs that you or probably someone else did not know exist. And this is just one example. This was just financial fraud. And we've seen all sorts of leaks, especially in Andhra Pradesh, where a lot of this project was experimented very early, before even the Aadhaar Act came in 2016, where you saw, like, we were showing people how details of pregnant women, which the state was collecting to track maternal mortality rates, because you're pretty much linking everything to Aadhaar, were public. So because you're linking Aadhaar to everything, you did not know where and what sort of information was being shared and how it was going to harm you.
We'll be right back after this short break.
Intel vPro provides the complete manageability tools to detect, repair, and protect your devices remotely, so your workforce can keep doing what they do best wherever they're working from. Today, as most employees and IT teams no longer work under the same roof, fixing glitchy PCs and proactively managing the PC fleet has become increasingly difficult. The Intel vPro platform addresses these problems. With its Intel Active Management technology, also known as Intel AMT, vPro enables IT to keep mission-critical resources running by establishing a secure connection between IT and an Intel vPro platform PC. In the event of a cyber attack, Intel AMT lets IT remotely manage and repair systems simultaneously, even if they are dispersed across multiple locations. PCs can be recovered quickly wherever they may be. Plus, the Intel Endpoint Management Assistant enables cloud-based manageability using simple web-based tools to connect with and remediate any Intel vPro platform PC. Both these tools provide better manageability and faster response time. This results in substantial device management support cost savings and fewer help desk tickets. Visit intel.n/IT heroes to know more. Intel vPro is built for business.
Welcome back to the Wire Talks. Proponents of this kind of Aadhaar really, but also its use in private sector say that, but you're ready to give your details to Facebook, and then you're not giving your details to, and they do targeted advertising, but you're not ready to give it to the government. Is that a tenable argument?
I think everybody out there right now realizes how bad Facebook is. They probably did not at its early stages, but there are also people who are warning about the issues with it, right? Now, if I'm choosing to give any data to Facebook, I am also questioning Facebook to do certain things, which it's not doing. Then the next best thing I could do is talk to my legislator, ask the state to regulate Facebook, right? Which is what people also asked the state to do with Aadhaar. That look, there are some things which are going bad and you need to regulate this project. And when the state said we are not going to do it, people went to the court. Like the parliament was pretty much bypassed. If you look at the history of the Aadhaar project, the idea of money bills came with the project. It was forced down on us. So that argument that, Facebook and Google, you're sharing it, yes, because people saw value in it. In case of Aadhaar, it was more coercion. And when Facebook tried to do that coercion in India with net neutrality, people opposed it. When Facebook said we are going to give free internet to everybody, people saw how bad it was, and we actually opposed them. And this idea, I think this term was coined during that time where we called Facebook the digital colonizer. But what we avoided the digital colonizer, where all of India, including the very proponents of Aadhaar project, opposed Facebook. Even we did it. Everybody opposed Facebook during the net neutrality project. But now the colonizer has left, or we made it hard for the colonizer, but we have our feudal lots. And we are somehow unable to regulate these feudal lots, where these digital feudal lots are determining how and what my digital self will be decided, whether I get to have a bank account, whether I get to vote, whether I get to have health insurance, is all being determined by policies created by these digital feudal lots. Because, see, the policies are not being made by Government of India. It's very clear that there are a host of private actors, Mr. Nilekani, iSpert, and there are a host of investment venture capitalists behind the project who see value in getting data, who are determining how the system needs to function, except it's just not private companies' fate that they are deciding. They're deciding the fate of citizens of India and how Government of India should do its governance. So that's the problem that I have with all of this. If you want to have digitization separately, your economics, you want to run a private company, please do it. But the moment that comes and interferes in governance, where this idea of citizenship around Aadhaar project has complicated things with the NPR project and NRC, these people are very silent about it. Right? Like it has complicated so many of these things. It has complicated our voting systems. I mean, I can go on and on, but the difference is this, that we were able to fend off Facebook in India, but we are unable to do that with our own private companies.
So coming to the subject at hand, and just explain it quickly to us, what is the problem with linking Aadhaar to the voter's ID? And secondly, why do you think it has been revived after the court shot it down the last time in 2015?
See, there is a larger project at play here. It's not just about Aadhaar linking with voter ID, but linking Aadhaar with everything to build this giant infrastructure, digital infrastructure for India, right? And Aadhaar voter ID linking is a part of it, which leads to electronic voting. Okay, and electronic voting has been attempted in several other countries, primarily Estonia again. Estonia is one of those countries where you can vote over the internet. We don't do that in India, not yet. Our EVMs are not connected to a network because we understand risks of it being hacked, elections being rigged, manipulated, all sorts of things. Even in the US, they don't do it, right? Estonia did it partially. Like people have a choice to go vote digitally or turn up at a polling booth. So it's all about this. It's all about electronic voting. The other place where this was experimented again was Kenya. During the Kenyan elections of 2016, I believe, there was something called the biometric voting, where people could come, verify with their thumbprints and vote. It was a disaster. It actually created massive riots in Kenya. The internet never functioned. The Kenyan Supreme Court had to call off the elections. Okay, these were experiments that are happening across the world. This is not only about India. There is a huge call that's being put out by technologists and tech firms to start digitizing elections and have electronic voting everywhere. So the dangers of linking Aadhaar and voter IDs without discussing all of this is a bad idea.
Given that all kinds of restrictions, including Supreme Court strictures, have not stopped it marching ahead, do you think that this will go through in time for the election? Because my fear is, among other things, what you explained, my fear is that certain sections will be excluded.
So the Supreme Court in its judgment in 2015 clearly stopped the Aadhaar voter ID linking. But its 2018 judgment does not speak about it. Even the main judgment, like the 2015 judgment, was an interim judgment which specifically ordered EC to stop doing it. The main judgment does not address this issue. And what the Election Commission did after the 2000, they sought legal opinion of the Supreme Court judgment, main judgment in 2018. And one of the retired Supreme Court judges, Justice Vikramjit Sen, suggested to the Election Commission that the Supreme Court judgment had a provision to allow linking of Aadhaar to PAN card and other systems when there is an explicit state interest, there's a national interest. And the Election Commission was told that, look, linking Aadhaar and ID can be termed a national interest, and which is what they're doing. But we all know there are larger privacy concerns around this, because if you start linking voter ID with Aadhaar, we know there could be an issue of violation of the idea of secret ballot itself, where you may know who's voting for whom. So the idea of your entire elections rely on secret ballot. And also, you must understand this. Aadhaar is a resident ID. It's not a citizenship ID. And right now in India, when people are opposing the census, the National Population Register, because it's questions of citizenship, your idea of linking voter ID with Aadhaar is going to fuel the citizenship debate again, especially in Assam. Okay, what the private sector or the government of India is trying here is trying to digitize our societies without looking at the problems of our societies. They're just encoding our society in a digital realm. But the last time we debated all of this was during Constituent Assembly debates, and we are not doing it anymore, and it's creating all sorts of problems for us.
But when you say idea of citizenship, and if you remember the anti-CAA protests were clearly because a certain section of our population, to put it bluntly, the minorities, felt that they were going to be excluded as citizens. And the same thing could happen by accident or design, that a whole lot of people, the minorities again in this case, but others too, will get disenfranchised. And that's kind of always a possibility, even if one shouldn't emphasize it, but that's a possibility, isn't it?
I mean, this has happened, right? Like disenfranchisement through Aadhaar has been always there. When they keep saying that we will remove frauds, what we have witnessed is actual real people were excluded from our welfare systems. Okay, whom you called fraud, duplicates, and dead people were actually live on the street, unable to access our government systems. Now, specifically with the Aadhaar voter ID issue, this whole project was experimented in Telangana because Hyderabad was one of those early digitization states, early advanced states where this was carried out. And when they did this in 2015, they removed 55 lakh voters, which was also a major issue that I have approached the High Court of Hyderabad. Now, we know for a fact that there was disenfranchisement, but that disenfranchisement wasn't targeted. But we fear it could be targeted now, especially against the minorities, as you mentioned it. But the scope of it goes beyond that, because once you link this, once all of the systems are in place, my actual worry is that this could be misused further during delimitation exercises. And the issue with NPR and census data is also pretty much that. Disenfranchisement can happen in multiple ways. It's not just about not allowing you to vote. It's also about reorganizing constituencies so that a certain section of the population will never have access to legislative power. And this has happened again across the world. It could be new to India, but the threat of it happening exists.
Do you think that they will push it through before 2024, given the government's urgency?
I don't think they can push this through until they have a data protection law in place. This will be tried, or if whenever they bring the data protection law, they are going to try to bring this together. I don't see this bill passing before the data protection law. I mean, if that happens, we are going to witness protests on the street. Like, this is changing our electoral systems drastically, which I don't think some of the sections of our populations will not accept it.
But, the Supreme Court rejected it. So are you going to challenge it again?
Okay. That's the issue, right? The Supreme Court wasn't clear in its final judgment. The matter of Aadhaar voter ID linking was in front of the court. If you read the final judgment, it doesn't address it at all. The interim judgment did. The interim judgment explicitly asked the EC to stop it. The final judgment left it very vaguely, where it said if there is a law, if there is some national interest, the government could pass a law and do some of this. But then again, this whole idea of linking voter ID, Aadhaar, even when they bring a law, I don't think it will work, because it brings up this question of citizenship back again, right? Like, voter ID is a citizenship ID, and you're trying to link a citizenship ID with a resident ID. That challenge is going to always take it back to the Supreme Court. Yes, if any lawyer who reads it can tell you that the Supreme Court has effectively limited the Aadhaar project to welfare only, right? But then again, with that limited provision where they allowed Aadhaar PAN card linking, they kind of left it open for the government to do these tiny experiments of Aadhaar and voter ID linkages. Like my petition in the Hyderabad High Court is all about this, where we actually say that the Election Commission of India collected a lot of Aadhaar data without a law because they already have it. They already done it. They should delete all the data that they have done it without a law. Whenever there is a law, they can probably do it again. But until then, the Election Commission of India has no authority to have Aadhaar data. There was no explicit informed sharing. They just forced data collections. And I have to tell you here, there was a lot of data sharing between the Registrar General of India at the Home Ministry, who collected Aadhaar and voter IDs. And this information was shared to the Election Commission of India during its exercise in 2015. Okay. And the worry here is back again that during the Census 21, you're also going to collect Aadhaar for NPR, and you may be collecting voter IDs as well. So the question of census keeps coming back because of citizenship and because you're bringing voter ID Aadhaar again, and the way you have done your 2015 exercise where all these databases were being interlinked brings back all of these questions. Yes, it will be challenged. We have to wait and watch on how it's going to come out through. But I believe there will be a lot of resistance to this because of the nature of the political economy of this country right now.
When you were saying that it's no proof of citizenship, and then you link it to the voter ID, which is some sort of proof of citizenship, we know the kind of implications that can happen. All kinds of people in different parts of the world could join in also. And are you going to check with each one of them, given our data collection, whether they are citizens or not? It's going to be, and then it'll probably get linked with your passport and everything else. Already the vaccination process asks for your Aadhaar. So basically, as a citizen, every aspect of my life is revealed to the government.
Yes, and frankly, during the 90s, a section of the world's population, specifically who identify themselves as crypto anarchists, foresaw this problem, where digitization leading to a lot of your data being accessible to the government. In this case, the US government, because 90s, mostly the internet was in the US and was spreading across the world. And what they did to challenge the US government created something known as the crypto wars, where some of these crypto anarchists built a host of privacy tools, including encryption. And they ensured that citizens are protected from nation states, and which is how we even got access to encryption technology, right? So you can design a lot of these systems from Health ID, Aadhaar, this whole idea of digitization. There can be a different reality where citizens' rights are protected when you are building these systems, when you're coding these systems, except because the private sector wants data, because there's a huge economy to it, and because the political establishment and the national security establishment sees value in collecting every citizen's details, it's being forced on us. Until we resist back the same way some of these crypto anarchists did, until we challenge the establishment on some of these, right? Like I'm not a Luddite. I'm not opposing digitization. Okay, I'm opposing the way digitization is happening in this country. And which is why you always say, let's rethink how these systems are being built. You can have privacy. and you can have digitization, and you can have an economy. It's not like a good or bad thing. It's not binaries. It's good and bad at the same time.
My last question is, do you think there is sufficient, CA was resisted by citizens, right? There was no organization behind it. In fact, the farmers' protest, hardly any kind of this. It's the farmers who've come out, whatever their motivations. My question is there an ecosystem which will resist it? And do you think citizens too will immediately, smart citizens immediately see the dangers here, will kind of launch some kind of resistance?
I think we have established the fact that Aadhaar is problematic with two major judgments at the Supreme Court, both the right to privacy judgment and the Aadhaar judgment, right? And I think a huge section of the population really understand what this is about. There could be a certain set of proponents who may be pushing Aadhaar and some of these IDs for economic reasons. But when it comes to systems like Aadhaar and voter IDs, Aadhaar and NPR and NRC, I think there will be huge resistance to these specific systems where they don't want some of these governance systems to be manipulated or disrupted with the introduction of these technologies. I don't know if I can say that there is an ecosystem to resist this. My hope is that people of all sections will understand this and actively resist it. And I hope that the courts will be mature enough to look into the problem at hand. I mean, all you have to do is implement the Supreme Court judgment. You don't have to fight it all over again. It's a basic demand that you could do. And I think it might happen. And also, it's not just about the minorities and disenfranchisement. You don't know how all of this is going to affect your democracy. So there could be a huge resistance from political parties in itself. So it's just not ECA's decision to force it on us. I think at least few political parties will oppose it. I see Asauddin Owaisi's MIM. There'll be, him and I believe Binay Vishwam from the CPIM were the two early people who opposed this linking as way back as 2015, where they formally wrote to the EC. But now there is also the Trinamool Congress. Congress may stay neutral in all of this because they really don't understand what they've created. To them, Aadhaar is just that welfare thing that they thought that they were doing some good. But other political parties, I have some hope that they understand what's happening and they'll oppose it as a majoritarian move, because it's at the heart of elections and franchise, right? So, yeah, I hope there is more resistance to it.
In the end, I think the citizens' wisdom will also prevail, and there will be some ground level this. So with that hope, thank you, Srinivas Kodali, for your enlightened explanations of what Aadhaar was, what it has become, why there are good parts to it, but why the parts that are not good are positively dangerous. That was Srinivas Kodali, activist and researcher on Aadhaar for many, many years, and of course other related issues like software freedom, and giving us the benefit of his research and knowledge on why Aadhaar is becoming so huge in our lives. So join us next week once again on the Wire Talks with another guest from me and the team. Thank you. You can check out this podcast and other interesting ones on the Wire website, the IVM podcast website, app, or wherever else that you get your podcasts. Goodbye from me, Siddharth Bhatia, and the Wire Talks podcast team.
Hi, everybody. Just wanted to ask everyone for a quick favor. We're running a brand survey right now and would really appreciate it if you could let us know what you think about the advertising on IVM. Go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and do let us know. As part of this, we'll be selecting 10 random participants and sending them some IVM swag, so do fill out those surveys. Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Paisa Vaisa, we have a midweek special as Anupam is joined by Chintan Haria, Head of Product Development and Strategy at ICICI Prudential AMC. They talk about the ICICI Prudential NASDAQ 100 Index Fund. What's it like to be a woman in the city? Find out on The Filter Coffee, where Vedashi Kambete Sharma talks to Karthik about her new book, Fatal Mistakes. On Audio Gyan, Shreya Satish, founder and CEO of OwnPath, talks to Kedar and Abhineet about how OwnPath was created to help professionals grow in their career through lifelong learning and professional networks. On The Longest Constitution, Priya explains how bar dancers are barred from dancing due to an arbitrary moral distinction in the name of public morality. And on Agla Station Adulthood, Ritasha and Ayushi discuss the hazards of chaos and the importance of appreciating silence. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our others for that matter, please do tell a friend. We really appreciate you spreading this. Word of mouth helps a lot. And finally, this week, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Cred, Bank of Baroda, Quarter, CoinSwitch, Kuber, Slay Coffee, and Intel. We really appreciate the support.